Hi everyone, I'm Jack the Rambling Raconteur, and I hope that you're doing well. I'd like to share a few thoughts about one of my all-time favorite African novels. It's a book that I discussed in my 10 Modern Classics You Must Read video, and it's probably the finest novel I've ever read on the African diaspora experience. I'm talking about Our Sister Killjoy by Ama Ata Aidoo. First published in 1977, this is an incredible book to read, to reread as I did this past week, and to pay close attention to, because Ama Ata Aidoo is a passionate, a precise, a philosophical writer. Within this book, she gives us a singular consciousness, our sister, referred to as Sissi throughout the book, and uses that individual experience, that individual vision, to ask questions about Africa, past, present, future, and to compare the local questions and communities that Sissi encounters on her journeys to Europe and her reflections on life in Ghana, her experiences with the African diaspora community, and to then take those and extrapolate them to more global experiences around what it means to be African, what it means to be a woman in the 20th century. And this is a perfect novel. So if you haven't read it yet, I certainly encourage you to. We are given our sister, or Sissi, as I mentioned throughout the book. She is from Ghana, she has a degree, and she's been sent off to Europe to learn. She's on a grant from the government, some of those benevolent societies. Sarcastically, Ama Ata Aidoo goes into how there are societies that are philosophically or diametrically opposed to each other. A young Christian scholar society, a young Muslim scholar society, one that is from a communist political perspective, another from a pro-capitalist political perspective. And so they're sending all of these students out into Europe to, of course, learn about Europe, all of the ideas that Europe can offer, the great technologies, the great civic ideas. And then, of course, at one point, they'll return back to Ghana to make good for their community, for their own lives, perhaps build a house for mom is what a number of characters refer to. But throughout the book, Sissi is encountering her own perspectives, and really through two lenses. One, of course, as an African, but one as a woman. And those fuse together in incredible ways across this book. But I want to share at the very beginning. It is a long way from home to Europe, a cruel past, a funny present, a major desert or two, a sea and ocean, several different languages apart, aeroplanes bridge the skies. Her journey must have had something to do with people's efforts to make good again, because right from the beginning, the embassy had shown a lot of interest. And so Sissi lands in Germany, and of course, immediately they want to group her with the other Africans. She's supposed to stand and walk off the plane with some men who are from Nigeria. They, of course, are there too to learn about Europe, to be able to return home in the aftermath of colonization. But Sissi, very much from the beginning, is questioning, why do I have to be grouped this way with these Nigerians? Like, we're not from the same part of Africa, not only from the same country, but we're not from the same tribe. And she goes into ideas around, even within the expatriate community from Ghana, when she later makes it to London, they're grouped together as individuals who came from what is called Ghana, but they come from different tribes. And some of them use patrilineal descent, others matrilineal descent. And so the idea around who in my family am I responsible to is something that is a quandary for many of the characters. During this journey, she begins to spend a lot of time with a young German woman, Marija. Marija has a daughter. She has a husband who's not really present very much. He always seems to be out for work. And so Marija and Sissi begin to form this bond and to have these interactions. And one of Sissi's earliest experiences is very comparable to something James Baldwin described in Notes on a Native Son, when he went to Switzerland and there were children there who saw a person with dark skin for the very first time in their lives. And so she has this experience with a child. From the little German that she had been advised to study for the trip, she knew that das schwarze Mädchen meant black girl. She was somewhat puzzled. Black girl? Black girl? So she looked around her really well this time, and it hit her that all that crowd of people going and coming in all sorts of directions had the color of the pickled pig parts that used to come from foreign places to the markets at home. She looked around and looked at so many of such skins together. Then she was ashamed of her reaction. Something pulled inside of her. For the rest of her life, she was to regret this moment when she was made to notice the difference in human coloring. No matter where she went, what anyone said, what they did, she knew it never mattered. But what she also came to know was that someone somewhere would always see in any kind of difference an excuse to be mean. A way to get land, more land, valleys where green corn would sway in the wind, a grazing ground for highland cattle, a stream to guggle the bonny bairns to sleep, gold and silver mines, oil, uranium, plutonium, any number of ums, clothes to cover skids, jewels to adorn, houses for shelter, to lie down and sleep, a harsher edge to a voice, a sharper ring to commands, power, child, power. For this is all anything is about, power to decide who is to live, who is to die, where, when, how. And that's how the first section ends, as Sissi has this this moment where she realizes not only, she of course has seen the remnants of the old British civil service colonial government that was there in Ghana. She's seen different individuals, and yet, as she's certainly seen Europeans on the plane as she's landed, but for a moment she realizes this is the first time in her life where she's the only African, the only woman from Africa in the space around her. And how separate she feels for a moment, and then she realizes she's been made to feel that way, and what all of that means. And the way that the novel is written is as a prose poem, where when we get into Sissi's stream of consciousness, the words form sort of like free verse, where it comes in, it's very staccato, it's very sharp and quick. And so each idea seems to be this new thrust of a sentence. It's not just a new sentence, it's a new line, new paragraph. It's thrusting forward in a really interesting way. It feels like we're cutting and getting like every single neural impulse from her consciousness. So it's a very effective stream of consciousness that allows Ama Ata Aidoo to go in and not only give us Sissi's thoughts, but to give us these wider thoughts on the whole. The experience she has with Marija and the interactions they have are really quite fascinating. That's very much the heart of the first half of the book. The heart of the second half of the book is this fascinating exploration of what it means to be part of the African diaspora, to have been someone who was very intelligent and successful in Ghana and now is making some level of success here in Europe and is finding money and is able to, as some characters note, they send the money home to build a home for mom. Someone is able to buy a car. And then there's a whole discourse on how well the roads are kept up and what is the worth of having a car if there are no roads to drive it on or no safe roads. There are characters who talk about, well, I send all this money, but I make so much more money here and I can keep sending more then. And so that second half has a much larger, deeper, larger philosophical question. But within the middle of the book, as Sissi and Marija bond, their relationship takes on very interesting tones. Part of that is the reflection each of them has as a woman. And so Sissi thinks, Adolf was going to be the only child, and she was very happy, Marija, he was a boy. Any good woman in her senses, with her choices, would say the same. In Asia, Europe, anywhere, for here, under the sun, being a woman is not, cannot, never will be a child's game. From knowledge gained since, so why wish a curse on your child, desiring her to be female? Beside, my sister, the ranks of the wretched are full. And then Marija goes on to reflect on how sad she'll be that she's never going to go to Africa to visit Sissi. That Sissi has been able to come here and see her home and her family, but she'll never be able to reciprocate. And of course, the one country in Africa she thinks, well, perhaps I could travel to one day is South Africa. And in 1977, South Africa is very much under apartheid, and the international community is becoming more and more aware, and they've always been aware, but more local individuals who aren't in power in business or in government are aware of the horrors of apartheid and what's going on. And so for Sissi to be told that this woman she's making these bonds with, she's feeling closer and closer to, and she feels united in this idea of we're both women, we both have these experiences of being told by those around us, your future is limited, your abilities are limited. This woman, when she says the one place I could come to on your continent is South Africa, how horrifying that is in that moment for Sissi. But their relationship begins to take on these fascinating tones. And this is something that I don't know that there were a huge number of African writers who were moving in this direction. And so for Ama Ata Aidoo to go where she goes next, just a couple of pages later, is really quite interesting. They had sat and time crept on. The false dusk had given way to proper night. Darkness had brought her gifts of silence and heaviness, making the most carefree of us wonder, when we are alone, about our place in all this. Sissi had been unconsciously looking down, unaware that Marija had been watching her all the time. When Sissi lifted her head and their eyes met, red blood rushed into Marija's face, so deeply red. Sissi felt embarrassed for no reason that she knew. The atmosphere had changed. Once or so, at the beginning of their friendship, Sissi had thought, while they walked in the park, of what a delicious love affair she and Marija would have had if one of them had been a man. Especially if she, Sissi, had been a man. She had imagined and savored the tears, their anguish at knowing that their love was doomed. But they would make promises to each other, which of course would not stand a chance of getting fulfilled. She would see Marija's tears. And so there's this exploration for Sissi about not just as a woman, what is our shared experience, but as we've become friends, as we've grown closer and closer together, Marija comes and picks Sissi up from the little hostel she stays at with others who've been brought from different continents to learn in Europe and work with students in Europe to be able again to improve their communities. As their bond shares and they see each other more and more almost every night, Sissi begins to think, how could our relationship be different? What would it be like if I was a man, or if she was a man, and we had this love affair, the love affair on the trip? And that's this wonderful question to ask. But where Ama Ata Aidoo takes that and develops it in the next couple of pages is even deeper and more fascinating, because it is Marija who makes this romantic overture to Sissi and suddenly kisses her at night and begins this feeling of Marija desires something she has seemingly never desired. We're never told, but she never seems to have desired with another woman. She never seems to have desired with an African man. And the bond that they have feels very, very romantic, and in a not just subtle, but in an explicit way. And so that leads to Sissi ruminating on these ideas around what was it like growing up in Africa and being told how the colonial government and how different individuals had been very oppressive when they had seen two girls romantically involved. And she thinks as well about the horrors of what did interracial relationships mean between a man and a woman, and how African men would be mutilated if it was discovered that they had had a relationship with a European or a white woman. And so she's ruminating on all of these ideas as she finally leaves Germany, and it becomes very clear Marija has, in a very real sense, fallen in love with Sissi. She wanted to make this enormous special dinner for her. And so for Ama Ata Aidoo in the 1970s to be exploring that side of the relationships, not just colonial relationships or gender relationships, but very much intimate romantic relationships in this way is, I think, far advanced and far more progressive even than the ideas that she has around decolonialism or the self-governance and the abilities of Africans. But there's a structure to the book. And so our sister Killjoy, as the book progresses, begins in the final pages to write a series of letters. And so there is a series of letters around sort of the letters she could have written home from Europe to Ghana, and what would she have said. And then there's this one final longer section that's a love letter. And it's a letter she writes to a man who she knew in Ghana, and then she reconnects with him in England. And she sees, of course, this diaspora community who is refusing to go home. And she notes within this letter, she essentially writes both sides of the arguments they've had in the past. And she's thinking through, what would the argument be this time? I remember promising you that I was going to try and be positive about everything, since you reminded me that the negative is so corrosive. You even went on to give me an illustration of what you meant with an example from medicine, that negativism is malign, like cancer. It chokes all life within its reach as it grows. I nodded agreement, my eyes lighting up at how professionally clear you always are. But I remember too that when I attempted to grasp your point better, by suggesting a political parallel, that negativism then must be like the expansion of Western civilization in modern times, because it chokes all life and even eliminates whole races of people in its path of growth, you said, laughing, "There you go, Sissi. You're so serious." But how can I help being serious, hey, my love? What positive is there to be when I cannot give voice to my soul and still have her heard? Since so far, I have only been able to use a language that enslaved me, and therefore the messengers of my mind always come shackled. I know you would scream at me full of laughter, pacing the tiny room, your quick steps eating up its spaces every now and then. Shackled? Sissi, your thoughts? Don't you think you were overdoing the modesty bit? Maybe you would feel embarrassed if you tried to be lyrical about the freshness of the air at midwinter, or the essence of polite conversation for those who go to tea with the English royal family, but your thoughts on any other subject never come shackled. Someone else's perhaps, but yours no, and you know it, Sissi. I would feel a warmness creeping around my neck at your appreciation of me. Yet I would also be aware of a certain anxiety to press my point, that it meant it symbolically, referring to many areas of our lives where we are unable to operate meaningfully because of what we have gone through. By now you would be losing your patience. I know you would. In fact, I can hear your response coming clearly. And so Sissi reflects on these final ideas of her final weeks there in Europe, and seeing all these other people that she knew in Ghana or who have roots in Ghana as well, and seeing that she, of all of them, is the one who's going to take the journey back across the sea, back across the wide desert, back across the language barriers, to return to Ghana and to return home, because it's what she loves, it's what she appreciates most, that she's had this experience. And in a sense, the only way it's made her better is through the different examples to reveal who she has always been, who her community has always been. And that's part of what makes this just such an incredible book to read. The bold, reflections that Ama Ata Aidoo shares in this, the perspectives on herself as an African, herself as a woman, and the ideas around the past that she has seen others take, and the trip that she's going to take back is just absolutely wonderful. It's a fierce novel. As I said, it's very passionate, and yet it is so precise. The way it's structured, the structure around the stream of consciousness as poetry, and sometimes that goes on for pages, or it'll be on one page, one word, and then another, to give this sense of depth and finality to that single thought, that neural impulse that Sissi has. And then the way that it's structured as letters at the end, and what she chooses to do with those letters in the final pages of the novel. It's just a fascinating and utterly effective book. So I love this novel, and I hope that others who have not had a chance to read it would enjoy it too. And of course, there are many books that I think of as I reflect on where does this work connect. Certainly Beyond the Horizon by Amma Darko, also a writer from Ghana, and also a writer discussing the idea of what is it like to be a woman living in Europe, and I believe even in Germany here. It's specifically reflecting on that. The ideas that are produced in Women of Sand and Myrrh by Hanan al-Shaykh feel very close in many ways. These are Arab women who are, the writer is from Lebanon, and the city's never quite named, but these are Arab women who are experiencing, their side of society in the middle of later sort of final third of the 20th century, and how closely there are parallels between this work and our sister Killjoy, including the experiences between women who are queer. Myrrh by Bessie Head. This is set in the southern part of the African continent in Botswana. And here we have a character who is from more rural communities, and different tribes of Africans experiencing sort of the bias that Africans can create, but also that Europeans have sort of foisted upon her. This is a fantastic work. One that looks more from the Nigerian perspective, sort of with the African diaspora, would be Second Class Citizen by Buchi and Emecheta. And she wrote a number of works that explore what it's like to be a mother, and again, what it's like to be a woman in that time, that place, and part of that movement out of Africa into different places, and still feeling very much, where is her home, where is her heart. The way in which the structures are innovative, the energy, the vitality, and of course the romance, the queer romance, reminded me of The Adventures of China Iron by Gabriela Cabezon Camara, which I read last year and loved. The form, specifically the way in which Ama Ata Aidoo is willing to discuss the horrors of racism, and the way that that interracial romance and various characters have truly had their lives ruined and horribly ended. And the poetic structures recalled Kane from Jean Toomer, a writer in the US. There are certain themes and ideas that resonate both with Tar Baby and Song of Solomon by Toni Morrison, a writer who referenced Ama Ata Aidoo as sort of one of her favorite African writers. And then, of course, The Great Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison, as an African-American man begins to, have his education, re-education, and the different forms of education that he experiences in this masterpiece from the 20th century. I don't think it's possible to mention writers from Africa without mentioning the great Wole Soyinka. Particularly, I would say his book, Ake, The Years of Childhood, as he reflects on growing up in Nigeria, or Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart, both from Nigeria. Kamara Lay in The Radiance of the King had a fascinating exploration where he takes a European deeper and deeper and deeper into Africa, and not in a sort of Joseph Conrad Heart of Darkness model, but in a way to appreciate and realize just how beautiful and sensual African civilization can be, and that there is such a thing as African civilization in The Radiance of the King, a wonderful book. I'll be curious to see how Paradise by Abdulrazak Gurnah reflects on this. The structure of the letters recalled Last Words from Montmartre by Chinua. And then there's a way in which our sister Killjoy recalls Evgeny Onegin by Alexander Pushkin, not just as Pushkin was sort of advancing a major Russian literary masterpiece, and Ama Ata Aidoo was doing the same for Ghana, but the way in which verse is used, the way in which society is revealed and reflected upon. If you're looking for more modern writers from Ghana, or contemporary writers, I should say, I would say Accra Noir can give Some great ones. And then a novel from South Africa from that time period during apartheid would be A Ride on the Whirlwind by Sipho Sepamla. It's much more political, but reveals exactly what was happening at that time. So let me know if you've read Ama Ata Aidoo. Let me know if you've read Our Sister Killjoy, if there are other novels from Africa that I haven't mentioned that you love. I hope everybody's doing well. Thank you.